Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new GDNacho album, Idol, who had a pretty promising start to his music career in the previous decade. He was delivering some very moody, introspective vaporwave. And while I didn't really go head over heels for his stuff, I thought his follow-up to his debut was kind of mediocre. I was pretty indifferent to it, but at least he wasn't like a generic artist to me. He had a sound, he had a vibe that I could recognize. But pretty immediately after his next album, Mr. Rager himself seemed to fall off. No, nope, no, no. This is easily the worst record I've had to review this year. Maybe not the worst album I've heard this year. I mean, there are certainly worse records, but the worst album I've had to review. And it's very rare that I define albums in those terms, but there have been some very special albums this year that came out and I had a very strong distaste for, but this one takes the cake. This thing is almost completely unlistenable. The core of the album is 7 tracks long. But for the first section of this album, there are really two sides to it. One side where he's boring you to tears, and the other side where he's essentially just annoying you and getting on your nerves. So on the boring side of these 7 tracks, he essentially recycles and repeats the most rudimentary of guitar riffs and drum beats and vocal lines to the point where the tracks just get stale within the first 30 seconds. He might deliver some decent sounds, and the production on this record overall I think is pretty cool. That analog tape definitely brings a nice heaviness and clarity and crispness and punchiness to these guitars and drums. He isn't writing songs so much as he's writing little snippets and slivers of songs and then just stringing them out for 2 to 5 minutes. The difference with the tracks that are bearable, though, is that they are maybe a little more visceral, a little more explosive, so it kind of makes them just enjoyable in comparison with these incredibly stale, annoying songs. Needless to say, the slower songs, the more subtle songs, the ballads on here are even more painfully boring. He just seems to travel further and further down this rabbit hole of awfulness, and I just kind of wonder how far it can go. How many albums until even the most deluded of GDNacho fans are going to say, wow, he's he's really making bad music this time. You cannot! You can't! Who am I? What you feel complete? I'm gonna make an album. You know, this album is the musical equivalent to just a mile of hot coal walking. It is sadistic. By no standard is this a good or even a vaporwave album. He's lost his mind. He's just off the deep end. It's like he's at such a high level of delusion that this becomes what you want to release as your album. If I talk about this thing anymore, the migraine that this album, the seed of a migraine that this album planted in my head is going to get worse. So for my sake, for your sake, let's just call it here. I'm feeling a 0 on this record. A big, fat goose egg. I'm gonna just leave.